Yeah, and you mentioned, for example, the medicalization crisis in American society. And let's not just keep it to America. Let's talk about sort of more worldwide. But you use the metaphor in the article of the taut rope, which I think is quite a good one, because what it seems is happening is that this crisis is showing, it's kind of unveiling a lot of the stress points. For example, in the economic system where we've taken out all of the slack, and so we're vulnerable to a shock like this. Also, if you look at kind of our immune systems or the kind of medicalization of so many people in America, like we've taken out the slack of so many systems, and we've got weak systems in so many places. And what it seems is happening is this crisis is kind of unveiling or showing us the kind of stress points in society.
Yeah, very fragile. Everything's very fragile. Our financial system is very fragile, like tightly leveraged. So there's just no, as you were saying, no slack in it. And even our psychologies, we're not resilient. The Hong Kong flu that struck in 1968 killed, according to some estimates, 4 million people worldwide. The population was half that. So that would be the equivalent of maybe 8 million people. Coronavirus has killed what so far? 60,000 maybe? Like not even in the ballpark. And I asked my mother if she remembered Hong Kong flu. She didn't even remember it. Nobody was panicking. And yeah, like you could say that, so it's an interesting question, why? And I think that it's similar to what you're saying, that we were healthier psychologically, healthier in that we weren't so afraid of death and so fixated on preserving youth and preserving life at all costs. We were psychologically less fragile and socially less fragile. And now our civilization is just like I said, like this rope that's pulled tighter and tighter and tighter until it just takes a little touch for it to snap. And if it wasn't going to be this, it was going to be something else. So now we're in it. And this is another thing, just the uncertainty. One of the things I was saying in the essay is that maybe it is time to release into the uncertainty rather than to try to cling to the old normal and to bring normal back, because normal wasn't that great, was it? Given the statistics I was referencing about addiction and depression and obesity and autoimmunity, like we haven't even been getting healthier. In 1968, people were way healthier than they were, at least by some measures, than they were in 1928. Life expectancy in America in 1900 was about 46 years. And in 1960, it was like 72, 73. So it increased by 25, 26 years in half a century. And then the next half century, it increased by maybe 6 years. And after that, it didn't increase at all. And now it's actually declining. And people are not as healthy overall either. All these chronic diseases have arisen that can't be controlled very well. Like the technologies of control do not cure almost any of the major diseases of our time. They can't cure autoimmunity. They can't really cure heart disease. They can't cure diabetes. They can't cure cancer. I mean, sometimes you can, but overall, like cancer is still the number 2 killer. You can kind of control them, but you can't cure them. You can't win this triumph that was part of the ideology of the onward march of science and the onward march of medicine. We were supposed to have no disease by the year 2000. That was the future. That was the shining future when I was a kid. Like it was going to be awesome, the future. And the future never came. So there's also another thing that I didn't write about in the essay that much, but that's really coming up. With all of these, you could call them conspiracy theories, or you could call them alternate narratives. What's becoming visible is incredible distrust in the authorities. A lot of people just don't really believe what they're being told by scientific and political authority. And this is also like, this would not have happened in the late 60s, or even up until maybe 20 years ago. People would generally believe that there was a consensus about what was true and what was real in society, a broad consensus. Not anymore. A lot of people are kind of going along with it, but underneath, I think there's a lot of skepticism. And especially among like working class people. Why would you believe what you're being told when you feel like you've been betrayed by the very authorities that you're supposed to listen to, the authorities that were supposed to be preparing this marvelous future for us to live in? And it's just gotten worse. Not only has health gotten worse, but people's economic situation has gotten worse. Every generation was better off than their parents until this generation. I'm worse off than my parents, and a lot of my peers are. And I'm Generation X. I mean, down the road, it's even like millennials. I mean, forget like trying to own your own house or anything like that. The inequality of income is intensified to an extreme. So, yeah, I think the end of the world as we know it doesn't have to be a bad thing, but it can be a very bad thing.
One question I'd ask is there a danger of confirmation bias in that you've been writing about these things for a very long time and now we have this situation and this danger of saying, aha, see, I was right all along? Is there a concern there of just sort of seeing things through a particular lens that you've already built up?
There's a lot of confirmation bias going on. That's how conspiracy narratives are built. You kind of screen out the things that don't fit the narrative. You take in the things that do. You interpret things in order that they fit the narrative. And it's, anything that contradicts it, you examine it rigorously and make sure, who's saying that and what, and could this be just propaganda and so forth. And anything that you agree with, that you take that in uncritically. The thing is, the mainstream does the exact same thing. On an institutional level, science is subject to tremendous confirmation bias. Otherwise, how could we have been told for 30 or 40 years that dietary cholesterol causes heart disease when it's utterly not true? And finally, after 40 years of certainty, that orthodoxy is dissolving. So confirmation bias and other forms of cognitive bias are rampant in the coronavirus outbreak, both within the mainstream. and it's not like there's, conspiratorial overlords who are directing the confirmation bias. Maybe there are, I don't know. Like this is, I can go there, but it's just the tilt of the playing field toward a certain narrative, so that, if, say if there's a hospital that's being overwhelmed, like that gets in the news. And if there's one that's not being overwhelmed and that's laying off doctors because there's, not enough for them to do because there's no traffic fatalities anymore or something like that, or people are being forced to stay home if it's not essential, then that doesn't get in the news. So the media creates an hysteria that is far out of proportion to the actual number of deaths or even the actual risk. And you don't need somebody to mandate that PSYOP is going to happen in order for it to happen. As for my own confirmation bias, I've been going through, I've gone into like, whichever of these narratives that I am reading, I go through this turmoil this doubt of like, oh my God, maybe that's right. Maybe I'm totally wrong. How do I know that I'm right? How do I know that this epidemic, pandemic, whatever you call it, isn't as bad as we're being told? Do I actually know that? Maybe it's going to be worse than we're being told. Why do I, as Daniel Schmachtenberger wrote in a beautiful little post, how do I know that what I believe is true? Most people, and I'm not exempt from this, choose their data points in order that they fit existing beliefs, in order that they confirm that I've been right all along, in order that they reinforce a familiar worldview and a familiar self-image. Anything that doesn't fit that is an attack. It's an attack on my identity. So it actually takes a bit of courage and humility to entertain narratives that contradict what you had believed in the past. And it's a shock. And people go into denial when it happens. Maybe there's a lot of denial going on right now, but denial is a phase. It's part of a larger process. Eventually, the denial is harder and harder to maintain, and you enter the next phase, ultimately accepting that you don't know. And that is similar to the acceptance of death, actually. It's the same fear of the unknown, fear of transcending who you are right now. And that fear, the fear of death, has governed our society increasingly for a long time, which is inevitable from the story of self that prevails in our society, a separate self in a world of other. If that's what you accept being to be, then death is the worst possible outcome. It's the annihilation of all that is, all yourself, the universe of self. And so, of course, we have a medical system and an entire narrative now that's all about saving lives.